Hello, everyone. Um, hope, hope, hopefully, we're all on track here now. It took a little while to get the camera going, but everything seems to be working now. It's Normena Amundsona here from University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, which is on the far end of Canada. So we got 10 hours difference between where you are and where I am. So it's nighttime here, but early in the morning over there. So anyway, we're going to be talking about active engagement in action. And the first is the fact that this project is sponsored by 2 Euro guidance centers in Latvia and Estonia. In Latvia, the State Education Development Agency, and in Estonia, the Agency for Lifelong Guidance and Foundations Innovate. So anyway, let's get into this. And I'm quite excited about active engagement. It's something that's very close. So, you know, I guess when I use this term active engagement, you know, it's really important to understand it in terms of a broad sort of social context. The fact that we're living in a world which, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change, you know, globalization. Just the fact that I'm here sitting talking to you is an example of, you know, how things are moving and how things are shifting. The faster pace in life, the greater complexity. The approach that I would suggest is something that I call active engagement. Let's just start with a small exercise, okay? If you would just take a minute and just is to look back as far as you can and just tell me what you're seeing. So turn yourself and look back, make a note of what you're looking at, push yourself as far as you possibly can, and then come back. Okay, now what we've done here is we've kind of seen what our perspective is, what we started with. And for me, I was just looking to do is to just relax. I want to relax. I want you to relax. Relax and set a goal. See if you could think about looking further than that, stretching yourself further next time. So if you're relaxed and you've got a new goal, when you feel ready, try to start again. See how far you can go this time. And then come back again. Did you go further? I can't see you, but I'm imagining most of you would say, yes, I did. And in some ways, that's kind of what we do, is we take people who come to see us and we relax them. We help them to set new goals, give them a new perspective, and then on we go with that. So let's see the first slide, the one about imagination. Can you just make that shift for me here? So I think that most clients, that they come forward with what I call a crisis of imagination. And in some ways, they're like us. They have a certain perspective, a certain span that they're looking at. And so what they need to do is to look further. And so they want to get another perspective. They want us to help them, you know, to spread their vision in some ways. So that's kind of what we do, is really help people to expand the perspective. And for that, I think we need to have some imagination ourselves. So I think to respond to this challenge, and if you just turn to the next slide, you'll see that what we need to do is really, you know, we have to use our own imagination. We have to be flexible. We have to take risks, be curious, work in teams. We have to focus and inspiration. a lot of the things that we need to help people, I mean, unfortunately, I often see that a lot of, and it's just not counselors, but even at the university where I teach, a lot of the students have the creativity just beat right out of them by the time they're in their graduate programs, and they're, forget about creativity. What are the 3 steps of this, steps of something else? And I think we need something bigger than that. I think we need to sort of energy to find that inspiration and that imagination again, and try to do something different with that. And for that, I'm calling for, I guess, a more actively engaged counseling approach. So if you want to just switch to the next slide for that, you'll see there's some suggestions there in terms of what I would do to make this work better. So change the slide now. Good. Okay, so so what am I talking about really? What is this active engagement counseling approach? What does this mean? One of the things I think we need to do is we need to become more holistic in our orientation. If you think about it, think about what does counseling, or however you want to frame this kind of helping relationship. And usually if I said, well, just describe it to me, what does it look like? They'd have a couple of chairs sitting in a room, people talking together. So to what extent are they making use of the physical, the emotional, the spiritual? How often, you have people talking together, but it's all kind of up here, it's in the head. And I think what we need to do is to become more holistic, to be broader with the kind of service we're delivering. If we want imagination, we have to have some imagination. Okay, what else do we need to do? Well, maybe that's the best counseling space, but maybe it should be something different. I mean, to what extent in the rooms that we're counseling in do we have things like flip charts or paper, colored pens, interesting looking places and things to work with? My son-in-law is a graphic designer, and when I walk into his office, I feel like I'm in a creative space. It's just full of color and light and vibrancy and different things happening. I feel it just sort of raises my imagination level. Now, walk into your counseling. Is your imagination level going up, or is it kind of flat? And I think some of us have just taken our counseling spaces for granted. We haven't really thought of them as imagination spaces. And that's what to do, is really think of these as spaces that you're going to be doing imaginative kind of things in. I mean, how often are we just, the time we meet with people, it's always the same amount of time. We don't take advantage of breaks in the action. If we finish, maybe we only need 10 minutes with somebody. Maybe we need an hour and a half with somebody. To what extent are we flexible with all of that? Also, how sensitive are we to cultural perspectives? I mean, often when we look at meeting someone, it's one chair in a room. Well, for some of us, I bring in other people, maybe it needs to look and feel different. It needs to feel, we need to have spaces that are attractive, not only to us, but to people from other cultures, and be aware of that. Now, something we need to do, and I think this is really an important concept, is really develop the idea of stickiness. Now, stickiness is something that, it's an interesting concept. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book, The Tipping Point, he talks about stickiness, the extent to which you sort of walk out and it really just stays with you. And to what extent are people leaving our counseling sessions, walking out, and having that sense, that feeling of, I really got something here. It really made a difference to me. I think that we have to generate more stickiness. And some of that is to sort of create things that are novel and different and new and, in a sense, challenge people more. Just do something in a slightly different way. So how do we do that? What's the process here? Well, one of the first things, switch slides now onto the mattering, the sense of relationship building. So we could just change the slide to mattering and look at what that looks like. Because and here it's the helping people to believe that they're significant, that they're important, that they feel worthwhile. And we create that. I mean, so much of what So I always want to lay that down as the foundation. It's the relationship. And it isn't just telling people they're important, but it's showing them that they're important, showing them in very small ways, little things that you do, paying attention to people, making them feel that they're important, that we rely on them for participation, leaving them with a sense of personal caring that, so they're going to feel that we're not just accepting them as a person or as a client, but we're accepting them as a person. We're interested in them broader than just that session, just somebody who's another case file that we can open and close. We need to see the client as more than their problem. That's another really key part of this, is that people are more than their problems. Sometimes we can get lost in just looking at people and focusing only on the problem. And one of the things that happens, I think, is that people see us and they've been trained. They know what they're doing. They're coming to see a counselor. They just start talking about their problems. That's what they're supposed to do. But maybe it's bigger than that. Maybe we need to see, yes, we want to hear somebody's problem, but we also want to get to know them as a person, kind of connection with them. And so that connection can happen in different ways. I mean, think of something simple like when an important person comes, what is one of the first things that we offer them? I'm going to hold it up in the air for you here. There, can you see it? It's moving around. A glass of water, something to drink. To what extent are we saying to, have a seat, have something to drink, make yourself comfortable. Talking about their life and how they got here. And, some of the stuff that we often say, well, that's just chit chat. Well, it's more than chit chat. It's really making them feel important, that you're interested in them as a person, not just as kind of an object. So this idea of creating a mattering climate, one in which you are seeing the person lens, but seeing the whole person, very important. All right, let's switch now to the whole idea of guidance. I was first introduced to this idea through Peter Plant and his use of the term green career guidance, and I stretch it out just a little further than what he did. So if you just switch to the next slide, please. So, it's interesting in our world today. I mean, if we talk about being green, everybody knows what it means to be green, and taking care of our environment and making right kinds of choices around pollution and so on. And we focus a lot on the air we breathe, we want to create a world where there's caring for the physical, Also, are we caring for ourselves, as human beings? Are we helping each other to really rise to the best of our potential? And really, that's, I think we could fit career guidance right into the whole career development, becoming green, not only with our, the air we breathe, but also with the people we are. And people to reflect on their passions, abilities, and also helping them to find meaning and purpose in life. One of the questions I think that we should be asking people when we're doing guidance is, not only did you get a job or whatever, but, and how is that going to help make the world a better place? Like push the envelope out a little bit here, and try to help them find things that are really well suited to them. I mean, I think that idea is, if we can get people working fullness of their potential, then we're doing something in terms of helping, taking a green perspective, I would say, on the kind of work that we're doing. As I've worked then through this, and I realized, I've given a whole hour and a half talk just on this topic. So I'm kind of leaving it with I feel in some ways I'm just kind of touching the top of it. But anyway, to just move on, and from there, kind of relates very, very strongly. And what does it mean to be hopeful? So let's switch to the next slide. And look at this next slide in terms of hopefulness and being hopeful. We understand hope in lots of different ways. We know in terms of sports, people who believe, you have to believe you're going to do well in order to do well. We know that in terms of illness. If you sort of say, oh, well, I'm done for now, and things like that, people will try to cheer you up to get you feeling more hopeful about your possibilities. In academics, oh, well, this is too hard. I'll never be able to do this subject. Well, guess what? That's probably what's going to happen. But if you say, oh, well, it's hard, but I can learn and I can do, if you have the right attitude, if you have the right sense of hopefulness, then you achieve more. So your attitude is such a key part in terms of working with, and there's a group of us who have been working on this theme. Several authors have kind of informed some of the doing. So if you want to just switch to the next slide. So here we're looking at Rick Snyder. He's done lots of work in hope theory, talking about goals and pathways and agency. Albert Bandura, and he has a whole agency theory, self-reflection, visioning, goal setting, three theorists, and then start to sort of take their work and add it into our own career development. We come up with a model of a hope action model of career development, and this is something that really a few of us have been working on. Spencer Niles from William and Mary University, and June Yoon from Penn State, and myself, looking at what this would look like if we introduce hope as a center point. And you can see here we've put it into a pinwheel where hope is the center and all the other components kind of revolve around it. And and we wanted something that wasn't sort of a step-by-step approach. Wanted something with a little bit of movement to it. You see here that you have self-reflection, figuring out who I am and what's the purpose and where am I going and things like that. You have self hope part is really the center around which everything revolves. So I understand, I think you had Spencer Niles come to you in Estonia. For some of you, this might be a bit of a review, but I'll make it a short review. So anyway, this is something, this is the approach, one of the approaches, and it fits really well with active engagement, I find, because what active engagement does is help me then define activities that I might put into these different parts of the model. And with my colleagues, we put together something called an inventory that went with it. So let's just very briefly kind of look at that. So if you want to shift to the next slide, in here we have the Hope Action Inventory. And you can see here that this is basically something that helps to focus on what we call the hope-centered career competencies, which are part of that model. And it's targeted for people 8th graders or above. And some of the items, and if you look in the next, if you shift to the next slide now, you'll see what some of the items look like. You could just shift to the next slide. So it's a fairly simple little, we use it as a pre-assessment, right, to get a sense of where the person is at the starting point, and also after, if they've been doing 2 or 3 sessions, then where they are and how some changes might have happened. And you see here we have for each category here, for each competency, and if you then move to the next slide, you get a sense of what it looks like when it's. So here's an example of Emily and what her results would look like, and you can see here that she's quite high on adapting and self-reflection. She's the blue line, adapting, visioning, but she's. And the green and the red lines are the norm, her norm group, and right there with self-clarity, bottom end of things, and she's bottom end of hope. It's really low on implementing and goal setting, and the green is sort of where 75% would land. And you can see that she's either quite high or quite low in terms of where she stands. But then you get a sense of what are some things that she might want to work on. What are some projects that we might work together with her on in terms of what could she do to help. She seems to be pretty good at sort of visioning and looking out there, reflecting a lot in her head, probably thinking about things like that. And a little bit, and is fairly flexible, but then, when it comes to actually setting goals and actually doing something with information, that seems to be a problem. And she also is someone that could benefit from self-clarity, and we definitely need to do something about her hopes. So it gives us a sense of what we might do, and this is some, kind of a pre-assessment that you do with a person so that they would get a chance to do it for themselves. Now, I'm not going to go into this in any great detail, but if you want to try it for yourself, if we now switch to the next slide. All right, so if you'd like to try it later and just see how it works out for you, this is hopecenteredcareer.com/HAI. Y-H, that's all lowercase, and then a capital D, number 9, and an N. And you can use that as many times as you want up to January 11th. So this would give you a way, try it for yourself. And if you have a client you're working with or something and you want to try it with them, then go ahead and use it that way as well. So again, this is something that might be useful for you. If it is, great. If not, and of course, language is always a thing here. But if you do have somebody who's speaking English, you want to try it out with them, give it a try. All right, let's now look at some of the research. We've been doing a lot of research with this, and really, for me, the exciting thing is I've been taking my active engagement concepts and tying them into some of this hope-based research. So, in a sense, in active engagement, that's what this new book that's just coming out, 4th edition, really details some of these activities, and but then this is helping to fit them into a structure, and you might say. So there's several research projects that we've been doing. We started off with internationally trained professionals, and did a project with the people from other countries who've come here to take jobs as nurses and radiologists and so on, and some of them are getting registered. And so one of the issues that they found is that they just lacked hope. And so we got involved in teaching, giving them some basic exercises. This was only over 1 sessions, and kind of just helped to re-energize them. Very positive results in terms of how it made a difference. We also then went on to did a study with unemployed clients, looking at face-to-face delivery, but also online delivery. Could we do this in both modalities here? And we used Tanis Goddard to sort of help us with some of the online stuff, and so she joined in with us on this project. And we just finished it, and we're just finishing up our article on it right now. It's probably within the week. It's going to be headed off for publication. And again, saw some really positive results in terms of the kind of changes we saw. We worked with Syrian refugees, did a project with a group called Mosaic, this time trying to fit it into a 2-week delivery program. Again, getting very positive results. We worked with the UBC alumni who wanted to start up something with career development and at the post-secondary level. And they set up a group delivery program. They also are now moving to an online program. We have other projects starting up with addictions and autism with youth. So this is some of the research projects we've been doing. Now, what are some of these activities that we're using? So let's switch to the next slide to see that. As I then take active engagement and fit it in, some of the questions were, there are literally hundreds of activities within the active engagement book, but pulling out some of the ones that I thought were particularly interesting. I really am doing more and more with metaphors, and ways. And some of that involves something I call walking the problem, story wheels, 2- and 3-chair problem solving, staying afloat, workplace attractors, my life is the book. These are just some of the exercises, a bit of the tip of the iceberg, you might say, that I've pulled out and have fit here is really take you through this and see, what does it actually mean? What sort of things am I doing? So let's start with metaphors. So if you want to just switch to the next slide. Okay, now why metaphors? What's so important about this? And I find this very excited about how many how powerful metaphors are, and how they're not really understood that well. And I've been training counselors for years, and I use a lot of metaphors in my ordinary language. But if you think about the training you received, how often have you actually specific training in metaphors? Metaphors are fabulous. They pull things together. There's this natural flow between reality and metaphors. It's a tool, and you can use multiple metaphors to expand your creativity. I just think that this is something we need to focus more on. I really would like to, if you walk away from this seminar today and say, well, what could I do more, of, or train, or whatever, if I would point you towards metaphors. I find sometimes people will say to me, well, you think in metaphors all the time, but I don't think like that. And one person said, I asked her, I said, so what's it like at work for you? And she said, well, it's really tough right now. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. And I just kind of smiled, and I got up out of my chair, and I kind of hopped around her chair a little bit, and suddenly she heard it, walking on eggshells. She hadn't heard it though. We're using these metaphors all the time, and we're not even aware of it. And so part of it is just getting people tuned in to, I call it, turning the metaphor switch on, so that you're hearing it in yourself, hearing it in other people, becoming intentional in terms of how you're using metaphors and visual imagery, and seeing what you do with that. And there's so much that we could do with this. I'm going to switch to the next slide. Well, one of the things that I think that metaphors really allows us to do is to take what's internal, what's inside, makes it external. When you start to sort of pull something like that, and when you talk about I'm walking on eggshells. Well, I use a lot of drawing or sketching or things of that ilk, and I'll just sort of sit there and say, what does it look like? Let's put it up on the board. Let's have so learning to sort of concrete, do something with the imagery to sort of to make it more come alive. Metaphors are a way of expressing empathy for people, to sort of say, it seems to me, I've heard your story. It sounds like you're just feeling like you're trapped right now. It's like you're in this big hole, and you can't see even a small sliver of light at the end of, you start using this imagery, and the person might say, yeah, that's it. Or they might say, well, not exactly, it's something else. Or, they might change it a little bit or something. It's a way to communicate. And it's often interesting too with metaphors to say, what did it look like before? And where are you now? What would you like it to look like? So using that timeline perspective, and I mentioned drawings, and using multiple metaphors, not just one metaphor, but getting people to think through lots of different metaphors. And I've actually written a whole book called Metaphor Making, which addresses a whole series of metaphors and how they might be applied in career development. I want to give you the next slide. The idea of a backswing is interesting, and it's a focused and measured effort designed to generate energy and promote a launch forward. Now, I'm going to just, right now, I've taken a piece of paper and I've got into a ball. I want to do a backswing. I want to make this thing move. And to move something, and think about it, not just throwing a paper ball, but if you were using a broom or swinging a hammer or a golf club, to make things move, And we always want to go forward, but sometimes you have to go backwards before you go forwards. And that's really important to think about, is the fact that you go backwards before you go forward. And that's the key aspect of that. And really what I'm doing is drawing a parallel here, a metaphoric parallel between our physical world and our psychological world. And so if I go backwards, and what happens when you go backwards? You build up energy. What are you doing when you're going backwards? You're starting to sort of reshape everything, getting that strength, that energy, and then you're moving forward, and there's a release and follow through, and on it goes. So helping people to understand that sometimes the best way to move forward is to start by going backwards. And it doesn't mean get lost in going backwards. I think sometimes you have to go backwards just to, kind of build that energy up. And sometimes it's helping people to remember their strengths, remember what they've done in the past, how their achievements, it's strengthening the person. I've worked a lot with unemployed clients, and with some of those clients, in 3 to 6 months, a lot of them have forgotten some of the, oh yeah, I'm good at this, or they're starting to doubt themselves. When we have negative things happen to us, we doubt ourselves, and then you start to have these problems. And so I think having a good backswing, and understand that we're all in the backswing business. When we work with clients, we take them where they are, and we have to move them back. But we don't want to get lost in the backswing, and we don't want to go back and go round and round and round with it. A good backswing is short, it's producing energy, and then you move forward. And what is that process? That strengthening, affirmation, hope-building process. And then when they're feeling good, then they move forward. And you think of yourself whenever if you feel hopeful about something, what type of plans will you generate? And if you're not, if you're feeling hopeless, what might that look like? And then think about this whole planning and action process. We always want to get people doing things. Well, the best thing to do is to build the hope first, so that when they're standing there ready to make that action plan, they're doing it with a sense of hopefulness, of strength, affirmation. And so that's a lot of what these activities are about, is how do we build that for people? So let's just go through some of these methods of ways of doing that. If you want to switch to the next slide, walking the problem. That's something that we use quite a bit, and it's really, if you're familiar with solution-focused counseling, you'll understand this as the miracle question. What I've added to it is kind of a physical element. And that physical element is that I actually get people to get up off their chair and to go to one side of the room, and that's the problem space. And then I have them walk to the other side of the room, and that's where the solution is. But in making that walk to there, they have to, so often our walk forward gets impeded by roadblocks. We say, oh, well, you can't do this because of whatever. But I say, what if a miracle happened? What if you could just, you were just transported, and you're sitting at the bottom of the hill, and suddenly you're up at the top. Now, for one of the people who, the Amber Clark, working in the international, with international clients, she found it was kind of interesting. In her room, she had a coat hanger, a tall coat hanger, and she had people stand behind that, and that was the problem space. And on the other side, she had a big plant. So They walked over to where the plant was. And so a miracle has happened. You sort of move from problem to solution. And then once you've arrived at the solution space, you look back to where you came from and think about, how did you get there? Where are you? What happened? I always give people their dreams. Never take, I really believe we have to be dream supporters, even if they're crazy dreams, even if I know they're not going to really ever happen. Let people have their dreams, and then we start to work out the details of, well, how are you going to get there? What are you going to do? What do you need to do to get to the top of that mountain? If I put you up there, if that's where you want to be, I've had one. I remember one client, a young guy, was saying, well, you want to be a rocket scientist. Great, you're a rocket scientist. Go there. Look back. What is the first thing you're going to have to do? Well, pass that math class. Oh, well, that's not so much fun. And, so then you start talking about, what you've done is taken something that's basically in your head and you've made it physical. And this is one of the big challenges, I think, for counseling, is we need to become much more diverse with our methods. So we can't just have these two chairs and sitting and talking all the time. Get people to walk one side, go to the other, look back, give themselves what advice would you give to the person on the other side? What would you tell them? And from the top of the hill, give advice to that person as they come forward. What do they need to know? What can you offer to them? Lots of different ways of kind of working with walking, movement, and again, a very active engagement type of activity, something that is interesting, is worth trying. Now, having said all of this, and as I'm going through these, I'm very aware people often say, oh, this sounds really interesting. And then I'll come back to them 6 months later and I'll say, well, did you try it? And they'll say, well, no, not really, and where to use some of these methods requires a little bit of courage and creativity. And I think you have the creativity. And people say, well, you're creative, but I'm not a creative person. I'm not, I can't imagine. I say, well, do you worry a lot? They say, well, yeah. I said, well, anybody who can worry a lot has great imagination, only it's negative imagination. What you have to do is take that negative worry and turn it into positive, in a positive direction. So I think we can sort of change things around for people a little bit. So, you need to challenge yourself to use some of these things that I'm talking about, because it's, they're interesting to look at and say, well, that's interesting, but you're not going to get anything out of it unless you try it, unless you have the courage, the personal courage to just say, let's do something with this. Let's see what I can make happen here. All right, let's move on to the career flow metaphor. That's the next slide. And you see here that there's the idea of flow. I use navigation a lot. The idea that you that we sort of navigate rather than sort of a straight line. If you think of rivers, and they kind of meander and they go at different speeds, and there's times when it's maybe a bit stagnant and other times when it's really flowing, and then you get some rapids and waterfalls. All of these things happen. And I'm looking particularly, and this is something that Spencer Niles and I have really worked on a lot, is this idea of helping people find their optimum flow moments, those times in life. And if you're familiar with some of the work of Csikszentmihalyi, you'll know he talks about flow, and we use the idea of career flow. Those times when things are just really, everything comes together. And I don't think this has to be necessarily just a career moment. It can be a moment anytime. But what are those moments like? And Because you see, I believe that we have to be looking at times of joy and times of frustration. And I think if we kind of look at that, we can sort of pull out some of the key themes, some of the I think these moments of joy and frustration are important to pay attention to. I really wish that we taught more of this in school, that we really taught people the skill of analyzing, what are those times when you really feel joyful? What about when you feel frustrated? What is it that makes you so happy here and so unhappy over here? What's going on for you? And we help people to sort of start to interpret their own behaviors. Because I think embedded within each of these moments, and it doesn't have to be like, it can be obviously an extended moment, something that may go on for a week or two or a month or whatever, but however long it is, in these high points, things are really coming together. And it's important to say, well, this is what I really want to do, is I want to, and we can't have it that way all the time. But let's see if we can't create a world for ourselves where we, if something is really important for us, then to put more of this into it. And let's be aware of some of the things that frustrate us and some of the barriers that are out there. So anyway, that's another whole side to this, is learning how to pick out these flow moments and how to work with this. All right, do you want to just switch to the next slide? Now this is kind of interesting. It's something, and you have to hit it one more time there. It's called story wheels, and you can see if you and just change the slide one more time, and you'll see the story wheel come up. Story wheels are really based on the idea that we learn a lot by getting people to tell stories, but not just the telling of the telling of the story is important, but it's more than just telling a story. It's also, what are all the components that go into this, the things you pick out of the story. And again, if you switch to the next slide, I think it'll start putting some of these pieces up. So as you hear the story, you suddenly, what does the story tell you? Oh, it's talking about leadership. It's talking about service, conflict resolution, empathy, etc. I think as counselors, we need to become, to be more active in terms of giving people feedback. And I know I've spent a lot of time working in Scandinavia, and I know a lot of times people in Scandinavia are fantastic listeners, but sometimes they don't go to that next step. And I know, Estonia and Latvia aren't in Scandinavia, but I'm wondering if maybe there might be some of the same tendencies. You sit and you listen, you take in the story, but you kind of say that, and you're empathic with it. You understand, you sort of, nod your head at the right moments, and maybe even do a small paraphrase or an expression of empathy. But do you really take the story, or help the person take the story apart and see what is the story telling about them? People are going to tell you stories. They're going to give you lots of stories. And I use, and the types of stories I'm looking for here, you can do stories around the flow moments. Tell me what that was like for you. How did you get into that situation? What happened then? What were you feeling? Describe it to me, in detail. Be curious, get lots of details. What happened? How did it end for you? And so once the person tells that story, then I want to sort of pull out all the different components, all the different themes that were part of that. And most people, if you ask them, well, what do you think this says about you? they'll give you 2 or 3 things. Oh, it says I'm a good listener, or it says I work hard, or they'll give you something. But you, as the listener, as the counselor, have heard so much more than what the person is saying, and so saying about themselves. So what I think we need to do is to be like witnesses to these stories, to be active, to shoot back to people, say, well, when I hear the story, I hear this, and I hear this, and I hear something else, and go around and I actually draw these put an S in the center like this, and that's sort of like a story, but really I'm creating almost a circle of strength. The story wheel is a circle of strength. It's like a bicycle wheel with all these strengths embedded in a story. And those stories can also be things about challenges. I want you to tell me a time when you really faced a situation that was quite challenging, but yet you managed to overcome it and get through it. How did that happen? Tell me your story. If you're dealing with a refugee, or somebody coming from another country, tell me your story of how you managed to get to where you are today. Like, what a series of challenges you faced, and yet you've got through. And hear this out, but then just don't hear it. Then say, when I hear this helps people start to see all the different things that you've located in terms of who they are. And it's a fabulous tool for building a sense of hopefulness and strength affirmation, helping them understand, themselves in a much better way. People will take these charts that you can create for them, which look a bit like what we have right here, and they'll put them up on their fridge with magnets, or they'll take pictures of them, or they'll do something. You really make an impact. Metaphorically, what you're doing is you are, instead of just I don't just believe in just giving lots of positive statements to people. I mean, to me, that's a bit like just giving flowers, and they're nice. Who doesn't like to receive flowers? Positive things that you say about to hear that. We all love positive things being said about us, and the research shows this, that people who have low self-esteem or high anxiety, when they hear these things, what happens is kind of like water off a duck's back. They like it, but they don't believe it. And so they're not believing what you're saying, but they're liking it. They're smiling, they're happy. You're a nice guy or woman or whatever. But I think what I'm giving here with the story wheel is not a cut flower, but a flower with a root. People might say, well, I'm not always a leader, or I'm not always creative. You say, no, but in that situation you were. And you can point them to the roots underneath the flower, saying, in that situation, in that context, you demonstrated this, and this is what I saw. And the person has to accept it more. And so I think through mattering and building that relationship, and through this kind of detailed feedback, you will start to change people. And this is it's a fabulous tool, something you can, on an individual basis, you can work just with it, but you can also work in a group by doing a demonstration and then dividing people up into small groups and having them tell their stories to one another, and then having the other people sit there and say, draw these wheels out for them and say, all right, this is what I heard, and give them a full accounting of what are the themes that are embedded in the story. And that's where we need to become more active. So I think, again, that's a really an important set of skills for each person. And, it's a key ingredient within active engagement to do this. And there's lots of different ways of looking at stories from that perspective. All right, let's change to another activity. Another slide, please. This one on you'll have to hit a few of the 2 or 3 chairs. Well, when people are trying to make decisions about, they're saying, well, I don't know if I should do A or B. They got 2 things that are going on in their mind, and they may have more. Whatever it is, there's often we do that just mentally. We're just kind of, how many of us you sit here and you kind of go back and forth and back and forth, and it becomes a bit of a circle. What if we took, and here I'm taking something from Gestalt, but I'm kind of changing it a little bit and saying, what if we separated that out and said, okay, on this side, you've got stay at your work and continue doing what you're doing. On the next chair beside it, you've got retiring. Okay, if this getting somebody who's thinking of those 2 things, then they might say, okay, do I want to retire? Do I want to stay working? What do I want to do? But I have them sit in a chair and say, okay, what's it like when you're working? And then they just talk about that. And then they move to the next chair and they talk about retiring. And so then we get both of these things get out there. And then I introduce a 3rd chair, which I call the moderator chair. And in the 3rd chair, I get the person to step out of their problem, in a sense, to move over and join me in kind of looking at these 2 chairs and say, how can we possibly bring these together? Is there any way? Should we just move one out of the room, or is there a way we could maybe move them a little closer together? And, and you get people saying, well, maybe there's a way of working half time, or maybe there's a way of doing this or whatever. Maybe the chairs can be stacked. Maybe we can have a little bit of more flexibility at work. And, people start to externalize what's an internal process. So what they're thinking inside themselves now gets externalized, and then we start to play with it. We start to move the pieces around. And you don't need to have chairs. Of course, you could do this with anything. You could have them just pick a color or something, or another object or whatever. But the idea of being in one place or another place, making it external. Again, I'm trying to take things out of just being strictly a cognitive activity and developing some kind of physical movement. Just the fact, of sitting in one of these chairs and talking about it makes it, it's a very different experience. And just getting up and moving is a different experience in and of itself. So again, another activity that you can use. One more thing that I'll go through here. Give me the next slide. All right, this is workplace attractors. Look at all these different things that the workplace has to offer people. And I sort of did some research looking at all different, what are the values? What are the things that people, that they want out of work? What is it that attracts them to work? And, one piece might be security. People want security. It might be financial security or physical security, but for some people that's really important. I just want to feel secure. I want to have that pension. I want to have that financial foundation. Whatever it is, that would be important. Or maybe it's the location. I really want to live close to the center of the city, or I want to live in the countryside, or whatever. The location's important. And so that's, again, something that might be something that they'd be attracted to. Maybe it's the relationships. It's the people at work that are important. I don't really like what I'm doing, but boy, there really are some nice people I'm working with, and I like that, and I like the people. So relationships can be central to you. or recognition. I like to, and for some people, it's the fact that, that they recognize for doing the good work that they're doing, and people say, well, job well done, and thank you. And, they receive that kind of status, I guess, maybe in some ways, or contribution, just doing good in the world, making a difference, finding meaning and making the world a better place, as I mentioned earlier with the green guidance. Or maybe it's work fit. It just feels right. This really just is using my talents and my interests, and it's just, we just fit together, the work that I'm doing and the kind of person that I am. Or maybe it's flexibility. I really need, I like having the option of, having long weekends and, working at home more, or having the ability to just kind of leave work for an hour or two, or start later, anything like that. Or the learning that you do, I really need to learn something when I'm working. It has to be something that is really kind of pushing me, challenging me. Or maybe responsibility. For some people, they don't like it when there's somebody's looking over your shoulder. Oh, what are you doing? Is that the right thing? They want to feel that here's the project, you are responsible for it, go do it, and come back when it's done. I trust you. And just that kind of thing is really an important aspect of work. And lastly, but not least at all, is innovation. These aren't in any particular order. The fact of creativity and starting something new and being a pioneer in the field, and variety, all of these. So these are all important pieces. And then I start to play around with, the fact that we have to make choices sometimes in terms of what's the most important to us, and also what things we could give up, what we could set aside, and I'm sure that for many people, yourselves included, you've been in situations where you say, well, as long as I have this, I can, compromise a little bit on this. It's not the exact place the location I want, but I am really making a big difference here in the contribution. However you're justifying it to yourself, what are those things that you are most attracted to, and what are the things that are, you could make, you could set aside or be more flexible about. And I don't have time today to sort of go into how I use this. I get people I take away some of their values, and other times I add them in. And, there's lots of things you can do with a wheel like this, but it gives you an idea of, what are some of the kind of ways of working. Just you can see our time is really going here. I'll do one more activity and just end it with that in terms of the activities. Just I think it's often interesting to sort of think of your life as a book. What would we talk about storytelling, but when we think of stories, they often have a beginning, a middle, an end. There's a title. And I'll take a piece of paper, and I guess you can't really see what I'm doing here, but I'll take a piece and fold it in half and fold it again to make sort of a small booklet. And what I have is then on the front of it, I'll say, okay, put the title of your story. What's your life story? One of the titles for mine was "Take It to the Limit One More Time." And I get them to think of musical titles or whatever. And then within the booklet, when you open it up, put in the main chapters, and again, be creative here. Like, how did you find your, how did I, if I was doing it for myself, when did I first discover that I wanted to become a counselor? And, I might put in some of these things, and what have I learned in each of these chapters? So this is kind of like a very brief survey of my life. And then on the back page, I'll put the chapter still to be lived. So in a sense, that's the future. Where would I hope to what chapters am I hoping to write as I sort of conclude this book? So anyway, again, a really interesting activity, something you might want to try for yourself, something that you might want to assign as a homework assignment, for people to take and go forward with. One more slide here. You want to change slides? Here we want to end with sort of with all these activities, sometimes you have to have some organizing framework. And for me, this wheel has been really helpful. And you can see here the different components, the skills and the interests and values and personality and significant others, the learning that you've done, the work-life experiences, career opportunities, all of these pieces coming together to essentially point towards certain career options. Often people will come to me, and they may come to you with this idea of like, I just want you to tell me what I should do. You tell me. And I think, oh, I'd love to help you, and I'd love to tell you but I can't do that until and then I show them this kind of wheel, and I say, until I understand something more about your skills and your interests, and so then we have to do some activities. We have to do some work to be able to plug in some information here. So this kind of gives them a structure, I guess you might say, that they can use to sort of put in information from some of these activities that I've described. So these are all activities. That's the last. You can just go to the last slide, I guess. These are all activities that I would say, and again, I've just given you a very short synopsis here of some things, but all part of active engagement. And there's a lot more in there that you can sort of glean out and try and develop. I'll leave a little bit of time if somebody has any last questions, or if you want to submit questions, I'm happy to provide, some of my perspectives in terms of what you're doing. The norm groups for the HAI, one of the questions was, are they Canadians or people from different cultures? They're a combination of Canadians and Americans. So if you were going to use it within your own country, you'd have to sort of keep that in mind, or else do some norming within your own country. So if you're using the HAI, that's something to keep in mind. Any other questions there? Things that people might want to. Metaphor cards. Oh, I've had a lot of fun with metaphor cards in terms of the question is, what's your opinion of them and experience them and using them when counseling? I love working with cards. Again, something more than just sitting and talking, looking, oh, look at this. And these questions, these cards have interesting questions on them. And it isn't just this set of cards, but there's lots of cards on values and, whatever you want to use. But, looking at the second wind metaphor, and what are you running for? What gives you a new burst of energy? There's lots of ways of working with cards to sort of, again, to make counseling more robust, more of an active learning process. Any more questions there? Yeah, somebody said they're inspired and they want to try. I'm inspired by this. I am so inspired. I think this stuff really works. And you know what's exciting for me? I I've always known this is the way I've worked my whole career. I mean, I've been working in this field for over 40 years, and developing these ideas, and I know they work, but it's not enough to say, well, Norm does it. He says they work. Um, Now I'm getting some research results that prove they work, making huge difference in people's lives. And I can point to that. And so this tying in of some of my active engagement methods into sort of a service delivery model has been really important for me. Oh, Christina says, thank you. It's inspiring. Well, that's good. I'm glad you're inspired, because I was sort of thinking, I'm thinking I'm that person who's heading out on retirement, or thinking I'm going to, but now I'm too inspired to retire. I'm going to actually leave the university, but I will, um I will be continuing to do other work. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with you. I know there were a few technical difficulties, but hopefully you've picked something up in here, and for those if you can get a look at some of the active engagement book, that you'll be inspired by that as well. So I wish you well, and I know. Thank you for this opportunity.